So first of all, I would like to know, you've been president of the AP for several years. I just would like you to refresh my memory about what was the history of reorientation therapy. When did you start to hear about this new development, and what can you tell me about the first reaction of the APA at that time?
It probably started in the APA in the early 1970s. And at that time, the women's movement was in ascendancy, and it tended to overshadow the gay rights issue. But the two seemed to meld as they went on. And there was a time when I couldn't tell the difference between women's rights and gay rights, because it involved the same people. The first time it came up, and I was a member of Council. This would have been 1975, because I remember that's when I made the resolution. I made the resolution that being gay was not a mental illness. It was characterological. And it passed the Council of Representatives. And that was the first issue that came up. I also said that with that the APA, if it passes this resolution, will also vote to continue research that demonstrates whatever the research demonstrates, unbiased, open research. It was never done.
Yeah.
It was never done. But the resolution that I made in the Council did get adopted, and by a wide margin. In that era, the Leona Tyler principle was paramount, that the APA would never take a position publicly that wasn't supported by scientific evidence, that it had to be scientifically demonstrated. And we abided, the presidents in my era abided by the Leona Tyler principle. All of a sudden, things began to change as things became more political than scientific. The Leona Tyler principle, which was never withdrawn, disappeared. In fact, you can't even find it in the annals of the APA. If I didn't have it, it wouldn't exist as far as they're concerned. But no, I had no idea, none of us had any idea that we were talking about open dialogue, research, unbiased, and the gay rights movement in those days didn't have the kind of militancy it has now. I mean, now it's all or none. In the early years, it was more like, let's see what's happening.
From your experience, when did you see this change of direction in the APA coming? It
started changing pretty drastically by the late 1980s. By the mid-1990s, the Leona Tyler principle was absolutely forgotten. That political stances seemed to override any scientific results. Cherry-picking results became the mode. And the gay rights movement sort of captured the APA. Yeah, it's very interesting the way it happened. The APA bent over backwards to be understanding and open. And it's understanding that it left an open door for people to rush in and use it for other than scientific purposes, for political purposes. It was preceded by a number of issues. It became part of the movement for what one might call diversity. You want to bring all underrepresented peoples into psychology. And this is a very lofty idea on the surface of it. But when it becomes a bias, if I had to choose now, I would see a need to form an organization that would recruit straight white males, which are underrepresented today in the APA.
What happened step by step so that the organization changed like this within 20 years?
We developed a group of psychologists that numbered around 200 to 250 that rotated themselves through all the offices of the APA. When a rule was passed that you couldn't serve more than X number of sessions on council or on a certain particular office, they would rotate. They would run for another office and then come back to council. So for years, about 200 to 250 people were running the APA, and they were a very select, inbred group. They were ultra-liberal, and anything that wasn't ultra-liberal was anathema. So that things like questioning some of the statements about gay and lesbian rights was not being accepted. It became a civil rights issue rather than a scientific issue.
Be protecting for public employees is not only heterosexuality, bisexuality, pedophilia, transvesticism, I'm not going to read them all, voyeurism, exhibitionism, fetism, zoophilia, necrophilia, klismophilia, and the list goes on. I teach in the public school system, and I know that this would impact the public school system, and we have parents who bring their kids to school every day and expect the school to protect them. And what's going to protect our children if someone that is a pedophiliac comes in and gets a teaching job, is a bus driver, is a custodian, and they could be people that just want to prey on children, and they'll be protected with this law. So we have a real concern considering the different types of orientations. I don't believe that's in the best interest of our children.
Now, you know when you hear that 1 in 10 people are gay or some other sex-related statistic that seems extraordinary and you're incredulous? Well, actually there's a reason to be. Because maybe most of this information comes from something called the Kinsey Report, an iconic study of sexual behavior. But Dr. Judith Reisman, an expert in the field, says this is severely misplaced. She joins me now from Washington, D.C. Welcome to you, Doctor.
Thank you. It's a delight to be back here with you again, Michael.
Thank you. Now, tell us about the Kinsey Report, because there was a movie about Kinsey with Liam Neeson, and Liam Neeson only plays really great guys, so it had to all be true, surely.
Yes, of course. He's the hero of heroes. I know Schindler's List and all that. Yeah, it's very tragic that he played this man. Yeah, Dr. Alfred Kinsey was indeed a homosexist. That is, he believed in the superiority of homosexuality or bisexuality, however you want to put it. He was a sadomasochistic psychopath, and this is all documented. No surprise, of course, a pornography addict, naturally. So no surprise, indeed, that he concocted a body of research he called research, which claimed that 10 to 37% of the population was homosexual, that sexual acts with children are perfectly harmless, that all infants can have orgasms and that sort of thing, and created what we now call the sexual revolution or sexual anarchy. Remember, this was 1948, so it was just barely out of World War II, so there simply wasn't the kind of opposition to these lies that would have been expected at all. And they became the dogma for all human sexuality education, and we now see it in all our laws across every aspect of the Western world, or Judeo-Christian or English-speaking world.
Entire government policies in the Western world in particular have been conducted, created
indeed.
around this.
Absolutely. You were just speaking a few moments ago about I just caught the end of it, but certainly I've been following the UNESCO policies and Planned Parenthood, International Planned Parenthood Federation, and that sort of thing, and our recent injections, not inoculations, of little children for Hep B was before, but HPV now. All of this comes back to the notion that we are all sexual from birth, and Kinsey created that notion, and now we have the pedophile information exchange moving into what's called the minor attracted children, minor attracted persons efforts to destigmatize all pedophilia. What we're looking at is a massive takeover by the pedophile world, and that is dominated even by people who've been advising the Catholic Church. Dr. Fred Berlin, who was advisor to the Catholic Church on pedophilia, just was the keynote speaker at the conference I attended on minor attracted persons, the effort to destigmatize all aspects of pedophilia and make it a legitimate, sexual orientation, indeed, is what was defined at that conference.
No, but this man is still advising the Roman Catholic Church?
As far as I know, he is. I have read nothing that suggests that he's been removed, and certainly nothing suggesting that he was removed because of his promotion of these policies from the very beginning in his clinic at Johns Hopkins, which was founded by Dr. John Money, who advocates for an end of age of consent, advocated for an end of age of consent from the university at Johns Hopkins, and advocated for even kind of what you'd call the rough sex defense if a boy and a man actually, one of them died as a result of what he called a sadomasochistic ritual. This is insane. This whole thing is insane. And these were the big advisors, yes, to the Catholic Church for many years. And Money is dead, but as far as I know, Dr. Berlin still advises.
This is staggering because, again, most people, Canada and the United States, that reasonable, decent, kind people, they simply want to coexist. They may have certain issues with people of a different sexuality, but live and let live. But this is radically different. Let's talk about Kinsey a little more, because, again, it's not that people quote Kinsey very often, but he's thought to be this great iconic father figure of sexual liberation. You're saying that children were raped in his clinic and he was fully aware of it?
Oh, absolutely, yes. This is the most amazing violation of scientific, it's worse than Guatemala. We have a 2-month-old baby identified in Kinsey's own book. I've written several books about this. It's not as though the scientific community is uninformed. It is, however, that they are protecting their turf. They've been quoting him for so long. A 2-month-old baby being tested, quote unquote, for orgasm. A 4-year-old boy having allegedly 26 orgasms in 24 hours. I mean, that's an around-the-clock experiment. Stopwatches used to record these things. Working with a Nazi pedophile in Germany. I mean, this is outrageous. And I have been unable to break through the control of the scientific world, which shocked me, I must say, in the beginning, because there's so much connected. There is so much money associated and so many prestigious names associated with Kinsey, so much so that we got Liam Neeson playing him in a major Fox, film to celebrate him, as though we were all idiots during World War II and didn't know anything about sex until Kinsey came along.
In June 1944, Alfred Kinsey left Indiana on an 1,800-mile trek across the southwestern United States. He was going to a clandestine meeting with a man who was to become his prime source of information about child sexuality.
This individual was, I suppose you might say, his interest in sex was his main hobby in life. Anything was a sexual object for him. He was interested in having sex with men, women, and children and animals. And he just was curious to see what would happen.
His first sexual contact was overt intercourse with his grandmother. He had looked up his family tree. There were 30, I forget how many, 33 or 38 members. He had had almost all of them. He had had intercourse with hundreds upon hundreds of males and females of every conceivable age. My memory is that it's exceeded 600 for both boys and girls, and we haven't yet got to maturity.
The man was a U.S. government land examiner called Rex King. To protect him, Kinsey gave him the code name Mr. Green. His job took him across Arizona and New Mexico, trips he used to prey on children. He molested at least 800 boys and girls, recording the details in explicit handwritten diaries. Kinsey was told about Green by his own mentor in sex research, Dr. Robert Dickinson. Dickinson had collaborated with the pedophile for several years and taught him how to record his child abuse in scientific detail.
He told him how to measure things and time things, and encouraged him to, he knew he was going to do his ordinary behavior anyway. Dickinson couldn't have stopped him from being a pedophile. But he said, at least you ought to, do something scientific about it, so it won't be just your jollies, it'll be something worthwhile to science.
The only justification for defending Kinsey was that all this happened before. If Green was sexually abusing children to 1954, Kinsey's last book came out in 1953. That certainly would mean that all of that violence and all of that abuse was going on throughout the entire time Kinsey was collecting these data, wouldn't it?
Green was not the only pedophile providing information to Kinsey.
We got them in prisons, a lot of them, because we had the prison records of these people. So we'd say, give us a list of everybody in San Quentin who's sent up on pedophilia charge, and we'd go after them. So we got a lot that way. Then there was also a pedophile organization in this country. They cooperated with us, and some of them who were not, of course, not incarcerated, they came and gave us information.
Not all of the pedophile information arriving at the Kinsey Institute in Indiana came from within America.
There was a man in Germany who was a pedophile, and he wrote Kinsey. And he was interested in information about pedophilia, and he offered his own case history. Of course, Kinsey couldn't go to Germany to get it, but he wrote him questions in a letter, and they carried on quite a correspondence. And we were learning some interesting things about pedophilia in Germany, you might say.
It is a criticism the Kinsey Institute rejects.
I think people have got to ask themselves the question, do they believe that research into sexuality should be done or should not be done? Particularly research into sexuality which might be, in some sense, illegal.
But if the cost potentially is more children at risk of abuse, can that cost be justified?
Consider the cost of remaining in ignorance. Unless we know about these behaviours, we'll be in a much worse position than if we have more information about them. That was Kinsey's view.
John Bancroft is adamant that Kinsey never did more than accept reports from pedophiles on their sexual activity.
Kinsey didn't ask anybody to carry out any particular form of sexual behaviour. He simply asked them to let him know of their experiences that they'd had.
But at von Balyasek's trial, an exchange between the judge and the pedophile seemed to suggest otherwise. The judge said,
I had the impression that you got to the children in order to impress Kinsey and to deliver him material.
And von Balyasek replied,
Kinsey himself asked me for that.
If the judge's impression was correct, and if von Balyasek was telling the truth, it would be evidence of Kinsey's involvement in ongoing child sexual abuse.
It tells me that von Balyasek, who was not a sex researcher, got his directions as to how to do the, quote, scientific part of the research from Dr. Kinsey that he was directing.
The issue of pedophilia, look, it's very easy to be sensational about this and play tabloid and scream and shout. This is a very complex issue. There are men who are attracted sexually to children. It's invariably, almost exclusively men. Now, how do we deal with that? Many of those men, some would argue most of those men, fight on a regular, maybe a daily basis to make sure that they keep these temptations in check, would never break the law, are often quite self-loathing about what they are. Those people have to be helped. I'm not here to play the bleeding heart with you or anything, but...
Now to a story about one of the most sensitive subjects imaginable, the abuse of children. There are some people who think attitudes and actions towards pedophiles should be adjusted. Correspondent Shannon Bream explains.
A small group of psychiatrists and other mental health professionals is advocating changes to the way the American Psychiatric Association defines pedophilia in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or DSM, saying those they call minor attracted persons are being unfairly stigmatized.
Instead, a psychiatric term gets turned into something that's just a demonizing pejorative. That troubles me.
Dr. Fred Berlin, associate professor at Johns Hopkins University Medical School, was the keynote speaker at a conference held by the group in Baltimore, Maryland last week. He says those pushing to redefine pedophilia are simply worried that the current perception keeps adults who are attracted to children from getting help.
If there are people out there who are attracted through no fault of their own towards children, we want to try to assist them to make sure they don't act in ways that are going to cause problems for other people.
But Berlin admits there were some at the conference who suggested sexual relations between adults and children are acceptable, something he says he does not condone. Dr. Judith Reisman, author of Sexual Sabotage, attended the event.
The whole conference was slanted very clearly to the notion that pedophilia was a normal variation of human sexual conduct.
In 1990 and 1992, the Baltimore Sun reported that Berlin refused to comply with a state law requiring him to report patients he believed were engaged in child sex abuse, instead directing them to first see a lawyer who could then direct them to Berlin, thus protecting any conversation under the attorney-client privilege. The Maryland Attorney General deemed that illegal. Today, Berlin labeled the accusation that he would refuse to report a pedophile actively engaged in child abuse, quote, absolutely false. Skeptics say the group Berlin spoke to has one goal: to move society a step closer to accepting sexual contact between adults and children, even decriminalize it.
Absolutely. Oh, they're very clear about that. Their goal is to take all shame out of the lust for children.
When asked for comment today, the American Psychiatric Association said sexual abuse of minors is a crime and, quote, we stand firmly behind efforts to criminally prosecute those who engage in it. In Washington, Shannon Bream, Fox
A party,
News.
we're told, is supposed to last well beyond midnight. As for the statue, it could end up at the Arkansas State Capitol, where there is a Ten Commandments statue also planned. Live near downtown Detroit, Jane Park, 7 Action News.